It's not Super Mario Land 2, it's Super Mario Land 2, the 6 golden coins, and I'm not calling it that. So according to Mario, written in a letter, he returns from Sarasa Land to find that an evil creep, in his words, has taken over his castle and hypnotized the entirety of Mario Land. Okay, so that's a horrifying retcon. Mario lives in a castle in a place called Mario Land. I guess it was just too convenient to forget about, and no one ever talked about it ever again for the remainder of the series, but it's a mainline Mario game where this is like this big piece of lore that's just never brought up again. And I mean, this letter that he writes is more words than he says throughout the entirety of the whole series. Someone explain this. Are there just a trifecta of castles, Marios, Bowsers, and Peaches, like the Triforce? Now, does this really matter? I mean, no, not really. Let's just play the f***ing game. Anyways, the evil creep, known as Wario, has taken 6 golden coins and spread them throughout 6 worlds. Looking at the gameplay, it's tough to imagine this game shares anything besides the name and that loose plot connection with the previous title. It's night and day when you compare Super Mario Land 2 with the predecessor. Sprites are a lot bigger, for one, but in general, the graphics are a lot sharper. I mean, look at this. They did this on a goddamn Game Boy? I'd say this is what Super Mario Bros. 3 is to Super Mario Bros. 1, almost as if the Game Boy had 2 separate generations take place inside of it. While being fairly different than Mario Land 1, this game does a lot that's unique to the franchise. The world themes are once again distinct and not anything like the Mario worlds that came before or after it, which makes it pretty fun to discover what's next. And what you find is technically person dependent, as the worlds can be done completely out of order. Sure, Super Mario World and Super Mario Bros. 3 both had a map screen with some choices, but it was still largely one world on screen at a time. Just gonna say it, for Game Boy standards, this is an open world game. Look, it's not a particularly high bar. Okay. Super Mario Land 2 may not be in Sarasa Land and may be a completely different ball game, but that's still not to say that they didn't try to be different. Look at these enemies. Lanterns with mouths, flying brooms, Jason heads with knives in them, ants, and the world themes are super out there as well. We have a space zone being the first time Mario went to space. Yeah, almost 15 years before Super Mario Galaxy. And yet when I bring a lawsuit against Nintendo for false advertising, I was sanctioned in a court of law for bringing a frivolous lawsuit. Well, guess who's laughing now? At the end of the space zone, we have a rematch with Tatanga, being essentially the only other connection this game has with its predecessor. It may seem weird he's not in Sarasa Land anymore, but he's an alien, so I mean, I guess it makes sense. He never appears again after this. He's canonically dead. Then there's the Macro Zone, which takes place inside of a house, taking game design cues from the best game of all time, Sneakers for the original Xbox. And the Mario Zone. You know, they probably could have spaced these levels on the map a little bit better. Did not one developer, did no one look at this and say, you know, what the guys? Both Mario Land games do this alternate world concept differently, and it's fascinating to me how different these two games feel, let alone how different they feel from the rest of the franchise. What doesn't feel different though is the quote-unquote new power-up, being the carrot, which turns you into Bunny Mario. This allows you to hover while jumping, which ultimately feels kind of similar to the power-ups in Mario Bros. 3 and World, but regardless, it's a cute idea and a worthy reward. But besides that, Super Mario Land 2 does away with a lot of the other series conventions. For instance, did you know that there's no score in this game? I bet not, because who cares about score, but it was noteworthy to be written on the Mario Wiki, so it's a big deal to me. And this is the first Mario game that has a easy mode. Oh, so you're the game that ruined gaming in the year 2023. Thank you. Thank you so much. The gameplay itself feels really smooth, especially for the console it's on. It's again hard to understate how impressive this game actually is being on the Game Boy. The controls feel fluid, as if they really patched out the flaws of Super Mario Land 1. In fact, I'd be surprised if they're even using anything close to that engine. This is in part due to the sprites being so stinking big, which I feel helps out with the player's ability to interact with the environment with razor-sharp precision. What makes this game most enjoyable to me is again the fantastic presentation, and also yet again the people writing the music for this game took a look at the flimsy Game Boy hardware and said, yeah, you know, I think I could write some of the best Mario music of all time on that thing. Someone was flexing to a ridiculous degree, and I can't blame them because you would be too. Now, I don't think the tracks are as memorable as Super Mario Land 1's, but the soundtrack feels a lot more coherent here. For one, there are a lot more songs in the mix, coming as a result of there just being 32 levels, but for two, they went for one of my favorite tropes in gaming soundtracks, which is the classic motif approach, meaning having a few of the same notes that play through multiple songs in various keys and moods depending on where you are. What's most most notable about this game are the memorable boss fights. The series up to this point had had some good bosses, don't get me wrong, but say Super Mario Bros. 1's bosses weren't necessarily fights as much as they were timing how you moved Mario. And Super Mario Land 1 harkened back to that design a little bit, at least for half of the bosses. But here we have some good old classic fights reminiscent of BS gaming in this era. The fight against the three little pigs genuinely took me a while to beat, and unfortunately for my ego, I can't blame the game. It's one of those fights, the ones where you have to sit down and memorize patterns and die and die and die until you punch a wall in anger and inhale the concrete dust and pass out. But the fight against the three little pigs pales in comparison to the sheer difficulty of the final level. Oh my goodness, I mean, this has to be one of the hardest levels in the franchise, at least that I've ever played. And if you really think about it, this is another trope in the franchise that has persisted to this very day. The final level just being a gauntlet. Well, no checkpoints, just you and your own devices. And there are mini bosses along the way too, being these balls with Mario's face on them. Yeah, I don't know. I think a lot of old coots are gonna call me bad at games for struggling with this. They're right, okay, like, I agree. But when a game does get this hard, I do what any rational gamer will do. I'll sit down for an hour and grind lives. Like, could I just use save states? Yes, I'm on NSO, but it just feels wrong to me. But getting your extra tries in the game, it feels better because it's a legit, and you get the satisfaction still of cheesing those game developers. Take that. And there's plenty of ways you can get extra lives, which are, again, hearts in this game. There are new bonus levels, and honestly, plenty of lives throughout the adventure that you can just stumble across. But to be fair, besides a few bosses, this game is pretty easy. If Super Mario Land 1 had a wall of a difficulty spike, this game has an ocean. I mean, mostly calm, but suddenly you have the waves, and trust me, it's very salty water. Final fight against Wario, I would say, is one of the best in the Mario series. It's multiple phases, with him using the same power-ups that you run across during the adventure. Hot take incoming! Hot take incoming! This is the best fight in the entirety of 2D Mario up to this point. I personally feel bosses have always been something that Mario's struggled with, but Wario checks off all the boxes in terms of being a classic 8-bit fight. Your heart is pumping, there are cute little callbacks tying in the themes of the adventure, and when you win, you really feel like you deserve your victory.